the part about grief that scares me is because I know it's gonna happen.
Yes. Yeah.
So,
Very good point.
and it's not talked about enough. And, you know, you writing this book, this grief thing, I swear.
I'm fine with
Or
it.
this,
Like, it's like
well,
two
because this
podcasts.
grief thing fucking sucks.
Yeah.
The book you wrote, you basically dive into your experience, and you're not really. One thing you made a point of is that you're not trying to like help, like you're not trying to teach anyone how to get through it.
No. Big no. I am not a mental health professional or a grief professional. I am, yeah, like I have other hobbies and interests and things, but this is just a big part of me and my identity and the experiences, and it's shaped me and who I am. And so I found that while it's been super, super helpful to have like a lot of resources, mental health professionals, like following these accounts, reading their books and whatnot to learn about it, a lot of the stuff that I'd actually learned and really resonated with were real life experiences and people's stories. And I'd kind of had a lot of writing and poetry already done, and like I got support from my sister and some friends to be like, turn it into a book, you know. A lot of us are interested in hearing a little bit more about your experiences. I was not one to talk about it much, and even to this day it's like until I get to know a person, really, I don't tell them, you know, this has happened. Now publishing this book is kind of inevitable and unavoidable. So that conversations come up a lot more, but it's not something that I was always like, yeah, the most comfortable sharing and talking about because it's a bit stigmatized, right? And because I didn't want to be a downer, you know, and like bringing up like, oh, why are you having a bad day? And I'm like, well, you know, this is actually how I'm feeling today. You know, this is an experience that I had because, you know, and I'm thinking about my parents today. And so like most mental health, you know, conversations and stigma, it was really interesting because then publishing this book, that kind of took me into a step of saying like, you know what, like we're going to talk about it. Like you said, it's not talked about a lot. It's especially for younger people like that don't experience, or we're not necessarily going to experience a lot of grief. Like even talking about it with my friends, they don't get it, some of them, because they've never experienced it. This was my window, my opportunity to be like, okay, here's a little bit about what happened to me, how I've dealt with it, what grief is to me. And maybe it will help people prepare. Like I think that was one of the big reasons why I wrote it, was my friends have a lot of them not experienced grief. And I was like, maybe learning from, you know, me, like when they are going to lose likely a parent, sibling, friends, like they can know a little bit more about it, or at least be comfortable with some of the language around it. And kind of how to support a griever, especially like young grievers. It's a bit different.
Well, it's pretty descriptive, man. Like reading some of the pages, and I was kind of really feeling it. With the one part where, I mean, you were talking about how, you know, it was recently after your mom passed away, and, you know, you kept, you know, picking up your phone to text her, and you called her, and it rang a couple times, and then you realize, like that, here's the thing. I can't, like we were talking about this before off of record. My mind, I can't imagine how that feels. Like I do not know. Like the thing is, it's never happened to me. Like if there's been situations and experiences in my life where that's happened, and you could like be like, oh, this, you know, a breakup. I can go back into my mind and be like, yeah, like I remember that time. Fuck, it sucked. Like, you know, these are the physiological things that happen to me, the emotions, the just everything. Like I can bring myself back to that time and like really be in the moment with what you're going through with, you know, for example, a breakup. Or if someone, you know, I got cheated on, like if someone told me this, I can go back to it, but this I can't because I don't know. And like, to be honest, reading most of the book, like I don't know how you do it. I don't know. Like I don't know how you got through, like just to be completely honest. And like, can you like bring us back to, I mean, if you want to, you know, the time when you were going through it, I mean, starting with your dad, maybe. Like,
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think one of the things I want to, like, that you kind of mentioned, and I want to, before maybe we start, is just explaining a little bit about grief, because then maybe it'll give us a good starting kind of talking point, and then I'll go on and explain a little. But the first thing is, like, grief is, like, by definition, just the natural response to loss. And that doesn't necessarily mean the loss of somebody. It can be like a loss of an opportunity. It can be the loss of a relationship. And so when people are talking about grief, they're saying, I'm grieving a relationship when you break up, you know, or if you've been cheated on or anything like that. And you can not get a job, and you can grieve the loss of that job and the loss of that possible future. And so, so those are, like, sometimes they're called secondary losses. If you have, like, lost a parent and now you've lost, like, having a dad walk you down the aisle, like, that would be like a secondary loss, you know, triggered by that primary loss. So kind of grief itself is, by definition, the natural response to loss, but it's your body's attempt to heal, right? The natural response is, like, your body's like, I need to get through this, you know, like, this, my life is now suddenly changed. I'm thinking specifically, like, parental loss, especially for young adults. My life is completely changed now, and I need to just get through it. And however we're going to do that, you know, it's a natural, normal response, and it's different for everybody. And so, yeah, you're saying that you can understand, because you've had a breakup, and you can understand maybe going into that kind of mindset and saying, like, oh, I can relate to this. I would even say maybe you can relate to the loss of a parent in that sense of, you still have grieved, you know, you have grieved in your life in many different ways. It might not just be the specific loss of a parent, even though in your case, technically it has, but it's been a maybe less traditional, like, parental loss, maybe not like losing your mom, right? Or that experience would be.
Yeah. So when you lost your dad, you were in grade 8.
Yeah.
And I'm just trying to, like, taking myself back to grade 8, and if I had to, you know, lose a very loved one and someone very close to me, I don't know, like, the next step, I wouldn't know what to do. Like, I always think about it, like, if I got the call and someone was to tell me, oh, your mom passed away, your auntie passed away, I wouldn't know what to do next. Like, do I get up and, like, go to my room? I wouldn't know. And, like, can you bring us back to that time? I really don't want, like, yes. I hate the fact that I'm doing this.
No.
Are you sure?
It's amazing. Okay. It's healing for me. Okay. And I think it's a great question. So for me, like, the experience of what I remember, because also I think a lot of losses come with a lot of trauma as well. And so I can say, honestly, like, my memories might not be that accurate, you know, and what I do say and think is what I think was my reality. And I guess it is my reality now. But I can tell you I have huge memory lapses when it comes to a lot of these times. But what I do remember is, like, coming home, my mom telling me there was, like, a social worker in the room, my grandma in the room, an aunt that had picked me up and was from out of town. I knew this day was weird. Like, I knew it right from the get-go. Like, there were weird things happening that day. My aunt, picked us up, who is not from, like, where we're from. And so I was like, why is she here? You know, like, something's going on. Mood was terrible. But yeah, right away we could tell there'd been a lot of crying. And my mom tells us, like, this is what had happened. And I remember in that moment, just shock. And I think that a lot of people can relate to, like, you know, shock. I was, from what I remember, stone-faced, not sure what to do. I had yet to, like, really cry. I was kind of like, what? Like, am I being, like, you know, am I dreaming right now? Is this real? And I remember my mom really crying, like, other people in the room really crying. And I personally think I took the time and I just kind of was like, what is going on? And eventually I got up and I went to my room. I think my mom was a nurse, so she was very encouraging of, like, you know, everything is natural, everything is normal, do whatever you need to do. And at that time, I remember at some point, I ended up in my room. I don't even know how I got there. And at that point, I really started thinking about things, and it kind of started spiraling. And from there, I did start crying. And then 2 weeks goes by. I remember I was helping out. We had the funeral, obviously, but we had other things going on. There's a lot of stuff that goes on with, like, people die that you have to be a part of or not be a part of. I was young, so it wasn't impacting me a lot, but my mom was running around doing a lot of stuff and trying to get involved in some ways, not involved in others. 2 weeks kind of goes by, and now I'm like still not really sure what's going on. My life has completely changed. I had like my dad lived with us at home and everything, and it was just weird. Now we had people around the house sticking around to help us out. Thank goodness for them. But yeah, like it's just a complete like different life now. And I remember I had to go back to school, like eventually, right? It was in the latter half of the year, but I did have to go back. And I remember thinking about a lot, like, what am I going to act like when I get back? So I was even in my head a lot about it because I didn't know. Like, I think a lot of people that experience grief, they don't know how to act. Like you're saying, oh, do I get up? Do I go walk around? Like, do I cry? You don't know. There is no right or wrong answer to that is like also something I've learned is whatever feels right for you is the start of that healing journey, is to figure out like, how do you come out of this to do the things you want to do, and become a person that you want to be despite having like gone through all of this. So yeah, that grade 8 year, even grade 9 and most of my high school experience, because of that, there were a lot of moments where I don't remember things. I was overthinking things in my head a lot, thinking I don't want to be, the girl that lost her dad. And everyone at my school also knew about this because we're a smaller city, smaller school. And I was like, I don't want to be like that girl, right. Even though there's nothing wrong with being that girl. But I also was just like really in my head oftentimes about how am I acting? Am I being judged, being perceived? If I felt like I had even bigger magnifying glass on me because of this happening, which might not have been true, honestly. Like, and me and my sister have talked about this a lot. Where like we felt like that, not necessarily the case. I think that's a part of it, though, is you get in your head a lot about how should I be acting? How
right.
should I be feeling?
Well, in a part in your book, you were talking about how, at the start when people asked you like how your dad passed away, it was how your dad passed away, and you would just say it was an accident or something like that, right? So even like, the way he passed away from suicide, like it's just kind of there's a stigma there, and like you don't want other people thinking of you differently and just kind of thinking, well, what's wrong with Taya or whatever. But and so like that was a big thing, like especially like with your peers, especially like in your grade 8, grade 9. And I guess like a lot of like in the Persian culture, like Iranian culture, a lot of the time when someone does pass away and someone close, a loved one does pass away, there is a community thing where like everyone gets together and grieves together, and it is a like a collective thing from friends, family, distant friends from different places. They all come together. But I know of a few people that actually don't want that. Like they don't want that group, that support, because it's for them, it's helpful in the moment, but it's only because they also know that these people aren't going to be doing these nights. Like a part in your book where you said, people around you, they were, dropping off like food for you, at your doorstep, or making dinner at your doorstep and leaving it there, just not asking for anything in return, which is great, which is awesome. There's a lot of support and love there, but at some point that stops.
Yeah.
Right. And like people go on with their lives. And like, I know of a few people that are not a big fan of, getting that support, because they know it's just temporary. They know it's gonna end. So I guess like, what are your thoughts on like that support, that community coming together? Like how much does that help? What really impacts, like what really causes the help of just like everyone coming together? I don't know.
That's a great question. I think that for a lot of people, like especially when you think about the loss of somebody, it does impact a whole community, right? And so everybody's grieving to an extent, and differently as they do. Some people, like their way of grieving and feeling like, you know, they're helping and they're healing is by dropping off meals and, you know, doing that stuff. And yeah, like it might not last like very long. Some people appreciate it, some people don't. But the way I think about it is like everybody's, you know, trying their best to do like to help somebody, but also to heal themselves. And so I guess also my take on like whether a group can come together as a community or not, or like why some people might feel like not to do that really has to do with safe like spaces and safe like people. And it's really funny you ask this because I've never really talked about this much, and I didn't actually write a lot about it. But when my mom passed away, it's the one I have the clearest memories of. I was very much like no community. Like there was a lot of, and I think the Dutch culture, so I'm half Dutch, there's a like bit of a culture of coming together, you know, after the loss, sitting together and just talking. There's a lot of talking in Dutch culture. And I personally, that wasn't what I needed right then and there. I had just been in Vancouver before. I had literally flew the day I heard about my mom dying from Vancouver to Lethbridge. Hadn't been back to Lethbridge in months, you know, probably since Christmas. So it just was, everything was kind of running really fast. Things were really uncomfortable for me. And then having all these people in my space, or I didn't really feel like I had a space because I hadn't been living at home for a while, wasn't very comfortable for me. Had I been maybe living at home and surrounded by these people more often and felt like these were people I could find in and talk to, I maybe would have felt like, okay, yeah, like I'm ready to be like embraced by this community and grieve collectively. But personally, it wasn't really what I was comfortable with or what I needed at that time. And I had to make that clear actually to some family because I was like, and they wouldn't know, you know, especially in these kind of situations are really traumatic at the same time. Nobody really knows what's the best thing to do. And like for me, learning how to communicate like what I needed has been really hard. I think it's hard. Communication's so hard for everybody. And I think that's actually one way that people can really prepare themselves for grief is to prepare themselves on how they're going to communicate their needs when they're grieving or when something traumatic happens. But yeah, for me, I just didn't really love the idea of community. My sister, her grief style is very like lock herself in her room. She's going to deal with this herself. Like doesn't want people around either. So we were very kind of isolating ourselves. However, we still really appreciated people coming by to help in a different way. Maybe not in a way where they expected us to come and, you know, talk to them at the door. Because frankly, I didn't have the energy to smile. Like I didn't have the energy for much at the time. So even like the idea of like having to talk to someone about what I was even feeling that day was not really what I was in my cards for the day. So the idea of people just really dropping stuff off at the door for us was a godsend. Like it was absolutely what we needed at that time. However, I can totally see, and I have some friends that grieve differently that want to be surrounded by people to give them that sense of healing. Sam and I also was a bit different because we'd already lost our dad. So losing our mom, we'd already kind of had like certain grief process like tools in place, and we knew what we needed to do. And for us, that was kind of more isolated healing.
So that's fine. Like so what you're saying is like the fact that your grieving styles were to isolate and stay within yourselves and not, you know, really be social and go, and that's fine.
Yeah.
Because, you know, naturally anyone would say like that's like that's unhealthy to like stay in and isolate and not talk to anyone. But what you're saying that's actually you know, if that works for you, it's that's what you should be doing.
Absolutely.
Huh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think like my sister would definitely strongly echo that because she's even more of an isolator than me when it comes to anything trauma, grief, feelings in general. And it's really been interesting because I'm definitely more of a social person. Like I'll know when I'm kind of, whether it be healing, grieving, anything's going on, when I need like people. And I need people way more than I think my sister does sometimes to be around it, even to be distracted by it. And actually one of the things after my parents died, I remember both of them, is I needed those distractions. I needed friends that I could go and talk to that I wasn't talking about this stuff, that I could go and just play sports with or like do something else, because I was so in my head oftentimes that I actually learned to appreciate those relationships so much. And to this day, like I have those relationships with some people where I haven't really talked to them a ton about grief or anything, but I value them for that because I needed that distraction, and still in my life I need that distraction, which is interesting though, because since publishing this book, it's kind of opened those conversations with them. And I do even write in the book, like it'd be nice to have conversations like with lots of friends about it, but I think it also just depends on the friendship, you know, and depends on the relationship.
I remember one part in the book, it was very interesting because I could kind of relate to this emotion where, damn, I took a screenshot, but I need to find it. You were talking about how, you know, you started becoming, you know, after, I believe this was after your dad had passed away, you started becoming very
overconfident.
Yeah, it was that
okay.
part. God damn it, let me find it. But you know what part I'm talking about? It was, you know, very, you know, you became very overconfident and just kind of like,
I would say the word's narcissistic.
I was gonna say narcissistic. I don't know if you said that in the book.
I think I did. I hope
like,
I did.
Specifically, but yeah, like,
Yeah.
like take me through that, because that is a little bit something I was reading. I was like, oh, I do remember, because I remember when I broke up with my ex, and this is just so like minuscule on.
No, it's not. It's not though.
Like I hate it. Just sounds so ignorant. That's like one of the biggest like.
It's not
fears
though.
I had
We're not
doing
comparing.
this.
It's trauma and it's grief.
Okay. But I remember after that, everything you mentioned in that section, I was like, oh wow, I've been there and I felt that.
Yeah.
So like, what was that about? Because I'm still trying to figure out why that happened and why I went through that and kind of felt that way.
And this is really cool thing to bring up, because I think a lot of people go through this, and I'll say what this is in a sec, but at the same time, I think more people, this would be something I love to talk about. So thank you for bringing it up. So one of the things that I noticed, especially after my dad died, I was in grade 8. My emotional maturity in grade 8, not great. You know, I bet you there are lots of grade 8s out there that are very emotionally mature. Myself, I wasn't. You know, I had a very sheltered, like privileged life up until then. And I mean, still now, but so I don't think I was very emotionally mature. And I think, so what happened was losing my dad, losing him to suicide. I didn't know what was, and to this day, it's still like, I don't really know what this is, you know, and how really to process this, but I'm healing, as we all are. Mm-hmm. And so what I think happened was it created a lot of insecurity in me. And one thing I know is that narcissists exist because they're insecure. You know, narcissism is driven out of insecurity. And so I was created all of this insecurity about who I am, what's my future going to look like. I was like, even things like worries about how am I going to introduce or start dating people, because I'm going to have to explain this whole thing to them and they're going to think, you know, these stigma things about, mm-hmm. you know, my life and my family. And I remember I was very, very insecure. And so my kind of, and I say it now, I didn't know at the time I was insecure, right? But what I did instead is I overcompensated with confidence. I was like, okay, because I want to go out there and still be, you know, have this life and live a life that I think is going to be great and, you know, still live out these dreams that I have. The only way to do that is to become this very like confident person, confident in myself, and hide these insecurities. And that's the definition of narcissism. But what it did was, I was so young at the time, and it did breed this really kind of unhealthy amount of confidence. Like I don't think I was a great friend to a lot of people, maybe during that time. And like I can say it really manifested later in my life worse because I didn't grow out of it. I never came to that realization, honestly, till my mom died. That I was like, okay, this isn't working. Like I can't do this again and just become an even more confident person, like as a way to heal. So I knew that I wasn't healing by just becoming this fake confidence.
Sorry to interrupt, but like what were some of the things, like you gave one example of like, you know, how am I going to explain this to people that I date?
Yeah.
What was some of the other insecurities like that came from that? Like, was it kind of, you know, my dad passed away because I wasn't good enough and he did it because of that. Like what were some of like the different things that led up to that, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Like, what, you know what I mean?
Yeah, there's so many things. And like there's when we get into the conversation about suicide specifically, there is so many insecurities I think that all suicide like loss survivors have, where a guilt, right? About, oh my gosh, like did I cause this, or how much did I contribute to this? Could I have like, potentially saved the situation? I know me and my sister joke a lot. We have daddy issues because of it, but it's mainly because also the choice of suicide being the option, because it does, especially that young, it's hard not to think about things like, oh, like, if I were maybe even like, my dad was a very sporty, athletic guy. And so some of the things that me and my sister have talked about is like, oh, if we were boys, would it have been different? Would he have been more like able to relate to us because he was kind of that macho, sporty guy? Yeah. And would that have made a difference in his decision, or all these things? And obviously now we're spiraling. We start thinking about this and we know it's more than just that. We know there's mental and physical health that goes into suicide and these things. But it was hard. And even, to say there's certain thoughts I'll have that I'm like, oh my gosh, like I haven't really thought about this or worked through this yet. I wish I remember, but there was one we were talking about, like about my dad's health, maybe being also a big contributor to this because he was getting older and he was such an active guy that the idea for him of getting old was, and even like, I think I write in my book, he's just not the kind of guy you can imagine getting old because he's like plays tennis like 4 hours a day and windsurfs like low-key competitively like in those summers. Like right. It would just be weird to even think of him getting old. And I bet you maybe he felt that way as well. So there's all these like those types of things that obviously go into the suicide like conversation about maybe the possible causes. And it's going to be a huge combination and cluster of things. Right. But now I'm on a tangent. No, but to go back kind of to it, my insecurities in particular were mainly, and they were very like self-centered. And I think that one of the things that's also kind of in relation to that question is, when you are healing, you kind of have to be selfish, right? You kind of have to focus a lot on yourself, and you do get stuck in your head and whatnot. But part of healing is learning to almost outgrow that to an extent so that you can eventually get to a place where you have empathy for others, I was definitely at a place when I was in grade 8 and 9, 10, high school. People probably from my high school would say I like them a little bit. I didn't have the capacity to have a lot of empathy for others because I was dealing with so much of my own stuff.
Of course, yeah, I mean.
Right, and that's insecurity, and that's narcissism, right?
Right. I mean, I don't expect any high school kid to be able to have empathy after all that. Like, I wouldn't. You know what I mean? I have
compassion for a lot of people that, go through. I mean, we all struggle with something, and I think that everything's justified. At the end of the day, the way people acted is justified because shit happens to people. Right. And it's not, we don't live in a culture and a society that healing is so normal, where healing is like even accessible, And so to expect people to come out on the other end and to be like healed is just not in this society.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like the closest thing, I mean, I've had to, losing a loved one is, Kobe Bryant.
Yeah.
And, again, it sounds ignorant because it's like, I don't know Kobe personally. I knew him growing up. He was an icon. He was my inspiration. Mm-hmm. But after he passed away, it was sort of because in my life growing up, I always thought of like my mom, my auntie, and my uncle as like, never gonna die. Mm-hmm. And Kobe, that was like those are the people. And then when Kobe passed away, it was like, oh wow, like this is a real thing. Like, obviously I'm not dumb. Like I know, it's a part of life, it's the circle of life. But when he passed away, it brought this realization to me where it's gonna happen sooner or later. Mm-hmm. And even till this day, like I still feel like, every time I see his photo or videos of him on Instagram or YouTube or anything like that, I still get this like gut feeling of just like, ooh, like I don't think I've been able to understand it. I don't understand it yet.
Yeah.
Right? Especially with someone like him, like he just looked, immortal to so many people, right? And I guess like I want to like skip forward to like when your mom passed away. How, I mean, I still like I'm really trying to like understand how you had the strength to get through it all, because I can't fathom like Alex, like, you know what I mean? Like I don't know how to explain it. It's like I don't have the words to like, if you were to like explain it to me with just in whatever way you wanted to, with any words in the dictionary, I still wouldn't like be able to, because I always tell my friends, I'm like, we always have like, I don't know why I bring these conversations up sometimes, but I'm like, dude, if I like my mom died today, like I wouldn't, I'd just like collapse. I wouldn't know what to do.
Yeah.
So for you, I'm just kind of like, I'm just still sort of in at a loss of words,
No.
to be honest. And I guess,
Well, I think that's what let me jump in for a sec. I think that's one of the challenges with death, is that almost nobody ever anticipates it coming. You know, very few of us, the lucky ones, have the opportunity to say goodbye to somebody that we love in the way that we want at the right moment. A lot of times you don't expect it, and that's why it's so difficult, right? You don't, it's hard to put into words because, like you said, Mo, I mean, if something happened to your mom, I mean, you have no, unless it's happened to you before, you have no basis to formulate an idea of what that would be like to go through, because you haven't. So you kind of just have to go through it. And that's why, again, why it's so difficult.
Absolutely. And I think like I would have said the same thing. Like if you asked me the months before my mom died, like how would you respond to your mom dying? I wouldn't have words. I wouldn't know what I would collapse. I would be an absolute disaster. And I was, and even having had lost my dad, I was lucky I did have some tools. And I think your first really traumatic grief experience might give you some tools like to help, like, well, maybe not even tools, but that experience kind of at least gave me, okay, this is what worked last time. Let me try it this time. Not everything obviously works both times or in any situation. But I guess to also put a word to it, like I call it in the book, and I don't know if people would agree with this or disagree, but I call it life-changing grief or life-altering grief. Thinking about things like where you lose a parent who is like so involved with your everyday life, or a sibling or a friend that your life actually fully is altered because of it. I think that's also a different trauma. And it creates all these secondary grief where now like your normal dinner routine is also changed, all of these other parts of your life of like you're grieving at the same time. But to be honest, like I don't know like how anybody grieves or how anybody heals. For me, I was so grateful I had my sister to go through it with me. She's been my biggest like means of support, but also just somebody that gets it, that I can talk to when I'm in my lowest points or I'm having questions or confusion. But some people might not have that. And in that case, I would say I hope you have community or some safe spaces and safe people to talk to. That's like would be my first concern.
I was going to say like having your sister is a big part of, being able to get through that. Just like
huge privilege.
Having those talks and being, just, relating to each other, obviously. And like a part, I brought up the screenshot of one of the parts that you talked about where, it was time, like once you lost your mom, it was time for you to like take the role, like the role of like, being a mom and having all those responsibilities, right? Like would you say like it kind of forced you to like get through it, because now you have to like not only take care of yourself and all the other responsibilities and obligations, but like you have to take care of your sister now, right?
So this is a really good point because it's actually something I'd love to talk about. So yes, I think a part of what helps us move forward is having stuff that we have to do, right? And I am naturally like a busy person, so having like a schedule of like, okay, just gets me through my days. And so yes, having all these responsibilities might have actually been like, they were awful in the sense of like, I hated having to do them and I hated like how stressful and how much stress it's caused me. But yeah, I think it gave me things to do and steps, to, get my life carried on. But the funny thing is like, one of the responsibilities I didn't take on was like being a parent figure to my sister. And it's funny because we were talking about this just the other day. And so I'd love to like mention a little bit more about this. Because obviously like a lot of people think I'm the older sister by like less than 24 months.
Right.
And because I had been in university and I moved home, a lot of people thought like I moved home for my sister. And obviously to an extent, yes, like I maybe wouldn't have been there like had my sister not been there. But honestly, I'm so grateful that she was there living at home and gave me a reason to move home, because I don't know what I would have done otherwise, but I really did need that time myself to be at home. And I needed my sister really honestly take care of me more than I took care of her. Like she was so independent already, and that's just been who she is as a person, that I feel bad because I think there's been a little bit of a misconception amongst like some of our groups and friends that I did take care of her. And not gonna lie, like I did take over some of those responsibilities because she was in high school at the time and had to finish high school. So I might have done some of more financial stuff,
Right.
Because I had the time.
Paperwork and stuff.
Yeah,
like that.
capacity, right? Like I had the capacity to do these things. But really when it came to her, like I wasn't cooking her meals, I actually played volleyball. Like I went home and played volleyball that year and I was gone half the weekends of the year. And she was by herself, at 16, taking care of herself fully. And so, but it's interesting because like I truly believe that she took care of me during that time, like a lot more than I did when we were getting along. One of the other kind of interesting things about that is I love her to pieces and she has been my biggest support system. But right after both of our parents' deaths, we were not like good to each other. And I think that's a large part of like also experiencing the grief and the trauma. Like we were in no place, either of us, to have really empathy for each other. We were just so stuck in our own minds that our worst points as sisters, like we fight like sisters, but our worst points as sisters were right after the death of both our parents, which might be a little counterintuitive.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I would assume like you get closer after that.
No.
So why? Like I don't know.
Yeah.
Why can you dive into that a little bit?
Yeah. I personally think it was because we both were just so hurt at that time. We were just both, we didn't have the capacity to love anybody at that time. Like we could barely love ourselves. Like I then personally, like this is how grief has felt for me. Like when I'm right in the middle, or not even just grief, but trauma and like this loss of my like mom, I was like, no, like I don't have the capacity for much right now. I'll get through. It's nice I have these things to do like throughout my day and I have to get through all these steps. But when it comes to anything beyond what I have to do, I'm not doing it. I'm going to do what makes me happy. And at the time, it wasn't like having empathy or being in a position to be compassionate towards like the hurt that my sister was feeling, And I think it was similar for her. Like she also like she isolated herself greatly. She was like even more so. It was her senior year of high school and she didn't even go to like a lot of parties and stuff. Like 'cause she just was like, didn't have the capacity for it, and probably other things. Like I'm not going to speak for her, but like that was a big part of it that I thought was really interesting, and I do think is interesting today as well, because I wasn't a good person. I can say that at that time.
Would you almost say that's okay though if you weren't a good person? Like
Totally.
that's fine if you're not being a good person to other people during that time. Like I wouldn't expect you to.
Yeah. And see, I also would agree. Like, I don't expect other people to be either. Like, if someone's going through something like terrible, awful, like really hardships, like I wouldn't expect them to do much. Like, and I mean, also having experienced like some really low lows, like I'm like, you getting up and getting through your day is enough for me. I want you to just be able to heal, do what you need to do to hopefully get to a better place where you are happy again.
Right.
And so if that means, not being the best version of yourself right now so that maybe we can see it one day, please.
Right.
Like, let's do it.
Yeah. That actually reminded me of remind me of something which is pretty pretty crazy. As you're talking about that, is I knew of someone that it was like part of our group of friends. Well, not really. He had just lost someone very close to him, his mom, and he was just being, he was just being a dick to everyone. He was just being an asshole, just like being overly obnoxious. And a few of my friends were not a fan of that. They're just like, dude, like, why are you being like that? Like, don't, like, you're just being an asshole. You're just being too much of an asshole. And I was the one that brought my friends over, and I told them, dude, like, and this wasn't actually, he hadn't lost his mom recently. It was like, it was like 2 years after. So, I mean, not a long time. I'm not going to say it's a long time, but I told my couple of my buddies that were complaining. I said, dude, like give him a break. Like, he's been going through a lot. He's gone through a lot, in the past couple. He's like, and they said, well, that doesn't justify the fact that he needs to be a dick. Like, we're trying to be like friends. We're all trying to be like cool here, but he's being like that. And I couldn't really understand where they were coming from, because I just can't imagine the pain he was going through. So for him being a dick, I was kind of like, fuck, okay, like, sure, you can be a dick. Like, you can shit on me. You can be an asshole, right? Like, I understood it, but my two other buddies couldn't. They're just like, dude, like, they weren't really necessarily saying, I don't care what he's been through, you can't be a dick. They were kind of just like, dude, like, come on, like, we're all trying to be cool. Like, you're kind of being an asshole, but like, why, right? So that's interesting that you say that, because I had a little situation.
It's like that. I think that's interesting because, like, one of my favorite, like, quotes or whatever it comes to when it comes to, like, truly anything is, like, you want to meet that person where they're at in their journey. And grief is one of those things that it will manifest 10 years later, like, in different ways, like and healing it from any trauma. Like, it's a long process. You never know when it's going to be done. It might never be done. You're kind of experiencing these things maybe for the rest of your life. And so I think it's like you had a lot of empathy in that situation, right? For that person. And I also don't fault your friends for being like, oh, I don't want to have this guy around maybe because he's being a bit of a dick, because they didn't have the empathy, right? Like, they might just be a little bit narcissistic somewhat. Like, they might not have the ability to have the compassion and the empathy for your friend.
Right.
But I think it means a lot, like, and it would be a goal, I think, for me in society, that we all can recognize, like, and have the empathy and compassion to recognize, people go through hard times, hurt people, and you have to be able to establish those boundaries with those friends to be like, to make sure it doesn't affect like your own, triggering you or causing your harm to you. But at the same time, like, if you have, the capacity to have empathy for this person.
And, my friends did have empathy. I'm not going to say they were stone cold, like, get over it. Like, it's been a year or two, like, time to move on. No, like, they have the utmost empathy and respect, but at some point it's kind of like, if you keep like just like going at someone, at some point there is a limit where it's like, hey, like, man, like, I'm here for you. I love you. I'm gonna, I know you're grieving, but like, you need to like take it down a notch a little bit, right?
You got to set that boundary with your friend, right? Like, it might not hurt to tell your friend, like in a safe way, call them in and say, hey, this is how, you're like, we're feeling in response to this. Like, how can we help you? That's another way to go about it, is like, how can we help, like, how you're feeling right now that's like manifesting as this like maybe angry energy or dick, you're acting in a way that's hurting other people. There are like other ways to do it, but there's also that important part of like really protecting yourself from these people. And like, I would say, like, for me, I bet you that I have friends that, or like maybe they're not friends with me anymore because of the way that I was acting after that, where I wasn't like the nicest person in the world. And I totally respect them for that, because they've got to protect themselves as well. And I think that's like another kind of layer to it. Yeah, you can have a ton of empathy for this person and feel like really like you want to help and like you really understand like, you know, they're hurting and there's not much like you can do and you just can hope for the best for them, but still keep your distance to make sure, you know, they're not hurting you in the process.
Would you say some people never get over it and grieve on, because grieving is a process. Do you think would you say some people never get through it?
Yeah.
They're still, they don't know how to, and for the rest of their life, they're in that grieving process?
Yeah. So I think, yes, like in a couple different ways. The first thing I'll say though is that grief, I feel like personally doesn't have a timeline and it doesn't end really. Like grief as the natural response to loss, like you'll always be, it becomes a part of you. It becomes a part of your identity that you've like experienced this. So you're always going to some way be grieving, you know, but maybe healing from like the more harmful parts of it, you know, that also are harming you and harming others. I think some people honestly don't have the capacity. And I say this and I mean this, like I do write about it in the book. It's a privilege for me to have been able to, and to this day, to be able to come out of this, like almost on the other side. I don't love that term, but to be able to feel like I'm healing is a privilege because I have the resources available to me to do that. Some people don't, and some people never will. And stigma and other things will also like prevent people from seeking treatment, from seeking therapy. Sometimes it can manifest in other forms of mental illness, right? And they won't seek treatment for that as well. I think that I have to have a lot of empathy for the people that do grieve and do have kind of like more harmful things that manifest out of their grief and their hurt. And it stays forever. And it's something I struggle with because obviously I've experienced this and healing has been something I'm able to do, but I have to recognize that's like oftentimes privilege, especially.
When you say almost on into the other side, how do you know that you're healing? What are some of the things that you're noticing and you're like, oh, okay, that's not really bothering me, or I'm not thinking of as much. Like, what is that like? Like, how do you know that you're healing?
Minimized triggers. Like, I still have a lot of triggers that I know about, but there are some that I've really worked through that don't cause me as so much anger or so much like sadness when something happens. For instance, like when my friends used to talk about their families and going on family vacation and all this stuff. Obviously, I love that for them, but it used to be so triggering. Like I would have to, that conversation would end and I need to take a beat and be like, okay, you know, like that happened. Like my adrenaline went up, my anxiety was high, right? Like I'm upset, angry. I wish I could have that. You know, I could have had that, like all this stuff. And so now I know that doesn't affect me. I can hear, it maybe sometimes does, you know, it depends on the day, depends on, you know, what they're talking about, maybe in more context, but I can hear about people's families and hear about, you know, someone can talk about their mom and they went out clubbing with their mom, which was something that my mom did with me a couple times and I loved, and not feel like, oh my God, like triggered. So that's one of the ways that I know that I've been healing. Just being able to sit here on this podcast and talk about it is also something I know I'm healing. Yeah. I would not have been able to do this 1, 2, 3 years
writing
after
this
my
book,
mom died.
Right? Like, you know what I mean? Like that's the ultimate, like, you know, being vulnerable and putting yourself out there about it and you're comfortable, right?
Definitely. vulnerability. Like especially since that confidence was always like one of my coping mechanisms for grief and for trauma and just for the hurt that I was feeling. My ability to let that guard down, to become, like, I definitely would say like a recovered narcissist. Like I don't feel like insecure about these things anymore. Yes, it hurts to hear when people talk about these things, but I'm not insecure in the fact that, you know, I don't have a family, like that traditional set parents I can go to the cottage with, right? It's more so now like, I have these other little things, little manifestations that I'm working on healing. But yeah, just being able to talk about it with anybody is me.
I mean, like, what's one thing you would say, you know, to people that are afraid of losing a loved one, right? Like are, you know, getting a little bit older and they know their parents are getting older and, you know, the time, you know, the days are getting you know, shorter, and like, for example, like my grandma, right, she's getting older, right? And I actually had this talk with my mom the other day, well, a few weeks ago, every time she texts me or calls me now, I'm scared because I'm just expecting her to be like, grandma's sick, or, something's happened, or someone else has passed away, because all my family members are getting older, right?
Yeah.
And it's like a real thing that I think about now, as as I'm getting older and my family's getting older. It's one of these days, when is it going to be one of these days my mom texts me where she's going to be like, call me, something happened, or she calls me on the phone and she's already like breaking down and her voice is like trembling, and I'm like, oh fuck, this is it, this is the day, right? And then when I do pick up the phone and she's like in an upbeat mood, like, hey, like, what's up, like, are you coming over? Then I'm like, okay, fuck it, you know what I mean? Like, I'm starting to think about that now. And I always tell this to people because I'm an only child, so I feel I'm so scared. I feel like I would be screwed. Because I don't have anyone, and that's something else I wanted to get into. Like, for, I don't, you probably, I'm not expecting you to have an answer, but like for people that are like only childs and, don't have that big of a family, like how, I guess, how do you prepare for life after, just a loved one's death? I mean, I guess I don't know, because it scares me. It fucking scares me so much. And
it scares me for people like you as well.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Thank you.
Like, it does.
It's tough, man. I'm serious. It's scary. Like,
because I know, like, it also is tough when people like me, like you were saying earlier, you haven't really experienced grief like in this way of a parental loss, that you would have like maybe some idea of what to do. That scares me as well, because it's like you don't know yet, what you're going to need. Maybe that is community. So one of the things might be like, do you have like a really good friend that you could talk to about these things, that's almost like a sibling, right? That knows you so well and your experiences, knows how close you are with your mom, that they get it and you can like really be a good listener for you, would be one of the things. The other thing is just, what other tools, what other things do you need in response to trauma in general? Like, if kind of generally, like, are you someone that needs food? Like, is food a really big part of your life? Is like a specific kind of food? Maybe it's a cultural food, and like, where can you get that, during those times? Some people are like texture, like, they really need to be wearing comfy clothes during that time. Like, making sure you have those basic things, like we say basic, but they're so very important.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like,
trauma.
like at the end of the day, it's just like very basic things, like just self-care type things. Yeah. And it's easier said than done. Like, it just sounds very basic, but like doing those things while you're going through it is just like unthinkable. It's
unthinkable that like something like a traditional meal can bring you so much joy and comfort during these times, and it's just something that you might have had on a regular Tuesday like a month before. There are just certain things that we will need that you don't even recognize before something happens, that they're just so valuable to you. And I think self-awareness, I guess, is a big part of it. Like, the more self-aware that you are, the better, like, you'll probably be able to help find those things that you need, and articulate them. Again, I'll go back, communication. If you're able to communicate while you're grieving, while you're going through trauma, like what you need and what you want, that's going to be a huge thing, like down the road for you, like so beneficial. And one of the things I do talk about in the book is I was trained when I was really young in speech and drama, which was like performing arts, of performing poetry and all this stuff. And I attribute a huge amount of like that and the confidence I grew to be able to have like a voice to being able to heal, because it gave me the confidence when, things weren't going right, to be like, nope, like, I need this, please leave. Like, I mean, maybe I didn't say it quite like that, but if people were around and I needed space, being able to be like, I just need like space right now. Because one of the things that really hurts me, like, if it makes me feel awful to talk about, is if somebody needs something and they can't articulate it, they're just like, they don't have the confidence to say like what they need and want, especially like when they're grieving. makes me like want to cry. Like that is the worst thing. And I think maybe also because like to an extent my sister and I, we've been there before where, you know, you get stuck in crossroads of like, oh, maybe this isn't a great time to say this kind of thing. And like that lacking of agency in that moment of when you need like your agency and your confidence the most is so hard.
You notice a lot of people can't do that.
I don't know if I would say I notice a lot of people can't do that. I haven't worked a ton with grievers yet, and I'm just like in the process of becoming like a peer support, and I'm interested in learning a little bit more about this. But I can see it happening because I've seen my sister in that situation. I'm assuming in other situations I've seen it with people that, yeah, like they need something or they want something and they just can't say it in other traumatic situations, right? And we do see that also in a lot of like identity conversations, like when people are talking about like even race and sex and stuff. Right. We see a lot of that. So being able to have that confidence and that agency and the safe space to be able to say what you need and what you want is an incredible step that you can take to prepare for grief.
Right.
Yeah.
With that though, I think also, do you almost feel like it's a little bit risky being able to, well, not risky, I guess risky putting your trust in other people to be able to help you get through, because people aren't fully equipped to know how to, you know, deal or communicate with someone that is grieving. So, and I guess I guess a big part of why, you know, like a couple of, you know, people that I do know don't like to be vocal about it is because they don't want their security and their happiness to be dependent on someone else, because they'll say something that'll trigger them. They'll you know, act a certain way where, because I feel like for me personally, I feel like, and I don't know this because I haven't been through it and I don't know, but I feel like if I was in the grieving process, I would expect Alex, or I expect you to know exactly what I want, exactly what I need in that particular moment. But if you can't reciprocate that energy, I'm a fucking, like, I'll freak out, I'll melt down, I'll have a panic attack, right? So, and for someone that, you know, has trouble regulating their emotions and understanding what's going on, having that self-awareness, do you think it's maybe a little bit of a dicey step to really, you know, put yourself out to people and expect them to give you the energy that you want, right? Because like I feel like that's like for me, like I would want everyone to be on point with everything I want, how I want them to speak to me, you know, for them to give me the right amount of compliments at the right time. And if they don't, it's like, fuck you, you don't give a shit about me, you don't care that I'm grieving, right? Like,
yeah, I think that likely happens a lot, and I can say that I was on the reciprocal side of that one. Like after my mom died, I had a friend that, you know, did some stuff that I really, and it made me so angry, like, and it, like, for me also it was a teller that maybe this wasn't the right relationship, right friendship. Like if like this was supposed to be a person that I trust, you know, to go through the lows with, and they aren't that type of person for me, then, you know what, maybe I need to redefine that friendship with them and that relationship. But it is hard because, like, if you think that they are that person for you and then they aren't, and they don't, you know, do these things, or they do something like harmful, that's a grievance in and of itself, right? Like that is, and so I guess in that situation, like what I would say, and what I would say to friends of grievers in this space is that you're not going to be able to read their mind. You're not going to be able to do everything perfectly. But if you approach the situation completely empathetically and ready for anything. So especially like if you're thinking the first couple weeks, months, year after like somebody dies, when it's like you might have like your emotional regulation might not be there. That friend that's going to be there for you though has to be okay and prepared and understand that, you know, if you do react and you do have like this huge emotional reaction because they didn't give you what you wanted, they're okay, and they're still going to let you know that they're there for you and that they're sorry, you know, like, oh shoot, I'm sorry, I didn't know that, you know, was going to hurt your feelings. I didn't know, or not hurt your feelings, but that was a trigger. And I know for now, like, I'm not going to, you know, do this, and let me know, like, to me, it all comes back down to communication,
yeah.
Right? Even though
like,
it
let
does
me know,
suck.
yeah, like, let me know if I say something that really makes you snap or really triggers you. Like, let me know. Like, I'll.
Yeah.
Right.
Because then it's also going to build that friendship. You know, it's going to do a lot more for you long term if you have other, you know, situations where you do rely on each other. But I think that's one of the really hard things, though, because I think in a lot of friendships, we don't always communicate so openly and honestly and vulnerably with each other. But I think we need to, like, this is something I'm learning now. I'm projecting this, but I'm learning in my friendships, like, to really define my friendships with people in my relationships the way that I need. So I have those people that I can say, you know what, like, everything's on the table with you. Like, and this is a trigger. I don't love when you say this. And they'll say, like, and I don't love when you say this, right? Like, and those are my people that I can talk to about these things. I can't talk about these things with other friends because I know that, like, they'll probably say something triggering. I've never established with them that these are triggering things, or, you know, that I just don't like to be complimented in that way or not complimented in this situation. And so it really, you can do a lot of, I think, work preparing for grief, in preparing for the types of relationships that you create, and saying, like, oh yeah, like, when I, you know, experience trauma, this is what I need. And so I think that's also what I would say to someone like you that doesn't have a sibling, because siblings know this usually, right? You grow up, you're so close to each other. My sister knows my triggers for the most part, you know, and she knows, like, when I like to be complimented, or like how to compliment me that makes me feel better, like what to say. For people that might not have that, forging a friendship like that will go a long way, you know, or a sisterhood or a brotherhood or like whatever it is, because having a person like that, or a relationship, a partner, will be incredibly valuable, since you don't have to do a lot of that communicational labor after the grief or after the death. Yeah. So just preparing ahead of time with those friends too that you think you'll be reliant on. Unfortunately, like we said, it's hard to prepare for grief or know when it's going to happen. There's very few people that do have, like, you know, maybe like a situation where they can prepare for grief for a little while. And maybe in that case, they can do this a little bit easier because they know that this is coming. Or, I mean, there's anticipatory grief as well. So people, you know, already started grieving the loss of someone maybe with like terminal cancer. So it's a bit different. But this is, I think, just especially since grief is such a big part of our lives, you know, in so many different ways. Like I said, the grief of like losing a job, losing opportunities, losing your physical body, like over time, you know, your abilities, your capabilities, all of these things, since it is such a big part of our lives, being able to at least communicate to friends and family and your support group what you need is going to be really, really important and beneficial long term.
Right.
Yeah.
And the ones that, you know, obviously, like, it's a good indicator for those that do, you know, understand and will do all those things. A good indicator who you want in your life. If they can't,
Absolutely.
right, then that's a
no. Yeah, you might have some friendships where you're more like, you know, that person for them, and you know they can't be that for you, right? And that's just comes down to like defining the friendships and the relationships.
This might be a weird question, but do you think of death differently?
Differently from what?
I wouldn't say more comfortable with it, but just less afraid of it.
Yes, I would say that I am less scared of people dying than probably some of my friends that have never experienced like a close loss of a person. I guess it depends on obviously the losses as well. Like what I'm going to talk about in the loss of people, friends, family, like immediate, like really close support networks. I would say I'm definitely less scared of death and losing someone than maybe someone that's never lost somebody. Just because, you know, I've experienced it, I've gone through it. I now know, I really know people die. Like that's inevitable. And now I get it. Like that's something like you kind of were saying, like until Kobe died, maybe you didn't like really know what like it meant that people are going to die. And I can see that being actually the case for probably a lot of my friends and community that haven't really experienced a ton of grief and death. But for me, it would suck. Like I can't imagine like losing more people. It always sucks. Like that's one of my title of the book. Like it always is going to be awful. But I do think it is inevitable. And I now know it's really important for me to prepare like in ways so that I have those support systems in place and my tools to be able to continue to live a life that I enjoy. But it did take kind of going through like really hating my life at times to get to this. And that's what death taught me, you know, like it taught me somewhat the value to life as well. And that life is incredibly valuable and not to waste like moments with people. Like I think obviously anybody that loses like someone that they really love and that they now really, really miss, they wish they had more memories, wish they had more pictures, you know, more stories to tell.
But that's the thing. We all say that, we all know that, but we don't really know what it means. Like, I don't really know what that means, to be honest. Like, I always say, like, I understand. I always say it too. Tell the ones you love them. Take photos with these people, hug them. And I always say that, like, I'm a big supporter of that, but I don't really know what it means. I really don't know what it actually entails when that person's not there, right?
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? It's just kind of like, it's like this like barrier that I can't like get past unless it happens. And then I come into it, it's like a different world. Like, oh, this is it.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to think about it. Like what it makes me think about is this kind of idea that this is what some people have religion, some people have faith as ways to also like really come to terms with death and like the loss of somebody. For me, it's like all we have is memories. I'm a bit of a physicalist like this. I'm like, all we have is memories. And so what I lose a lot of the time and what like we lose the ability to create new memories. And that's what really hurts. And for me, when I think about like, what is, death and what does this mean and what is life? And so when we say like, oh yeah, like, okay, we say all these things, we should do this. I'm saying like, have those memories, but remember those memories and really appreciate creating those memories. Because once you lose the ability to have and create memories, that's the part that like is trippy. Like even when I think about that with my sister, I'm like, yeah, like I love her, I appreciate her, I give her hugs, and I try my best to always be a best sister to her because one day, she might not, but one day she might. And in that case, I'm like, I really just want to appreciate the time that I have with her now and the memories that we can create. Because one day I won't be able to maybe, or vice versa, she might not be able to make those memories with me. And then finding a way to maybe remember them. So also like one of the things I really recommend, and I'm maybe even going to try and get around to with what my parents and stuff, is like creating memory books when somebody dies where everyone can kind of share their memories of this person. Because for me, like what keeps somebody alive, like what keeps somebody is the memory of them, the legacy of them. That is what we talk about when we say they're with you. It's like they're with you because they actually made up a big part of your identity and who you are. And they're shaping so much of your future, even though they're not presently with you. It's those memories and those experiences that you have with them. And so, yeah, I guess my response to that is like, really, you're losing the opportunity to make memories. So even if it's not like all love all the time, you're still you're still making those memories.
Yeah, you're having that experience with that person in that moment.
Yeah.
You're present in that moment. Yeah, I never really thought about it like that. Yeah. Whether it's bad memory or a good memory, it's still a memory that you had with that person.
Exactly. And so thinking about like for you, maybe if you've never experienced that, like not being able to have that anymore, like that's probably hard to understand, right? Like or can you understand that? Because that's to me loss, like I'm lost, especially with a person, like death, lost that opportunity. And that's where the difference between like thinking about somebody, potentially dying and all this stuff exists versus they have died. And that really like materialization of it is like, I have no more opportunity to make memories with this person.
Right.
Yeah.
one more thing I wanted to talk about. It's actually, it came up in my head as we were talking, is I think in the Persian culture, death is like a very like it's very, very devastating. Like it's so, it's almost in the Persian culture, when a loved one dies, a family member dies, you're encouraged to be depressed. Like you need to be depressed. Like people gather around to cry and really, really just like sit with it and like really kind of like it's the worst thing that could happen ever, and it's unthinkable. Whereas, I've been to a party where, one of my best friends, his grandmother passed away, and they had a party the next like 2 days, celebrating her life. Everyone was around eating food, drinking, having a good time. And I wonder like if that's a part of me of why I'm so scared of someone, close to me dying, because I know after that there's going to be this whole different thing, like this whole process after, where I have to cry. I need to be depressed. I know that for a fact.
Yeah.
Because within the Persian culture and I guess Islam, I'm not really religious, but like it's a mourning process where you're really like breaking yourself down. Like you need to. It's like you're kind of like required to. Right?
Okay. So that's a very cultural experience.
It's very cultural.
Of grief and loss. And that's interesting because obviously these things exist because it was somebody's or some group's idea of like the way to get through loss, the way to start healing or to heal. And as with everything, like it's just like the one shoe doesn't fit all, like everybody does have different grieving processes and different things that they need to heal. And so it's always interesting to hear about like how different cultures and different people do things, because especially when we have our own way of doing things. But it's especially interesting now hearing you say, I'm going to have to do it this way.
Yeah.
And maybe you aren't the most comfortable, doing it this way, and it's making things harder. That's really interesting, and that's really hard. That's going to make things especially harder for you if that's not actually your intuitive way to heal. Right? So
I mean, that's
wow.
the thing. Like I would rather have it, I don't want, as soon as someone dies for them, to have a party that night and like just be very happy. Like I get like it's a sad moment. It's a very devastating moment, but it almost gets to the point where it's like you should be like debilitating yourself for like a couple months. Like you kind of like there's actual like milestones in the Persian culture, or I think it's not actually Iranian, it's like like a Muslim thing, but it's like after the first month you have to mourn, after the third month you have to mourn, and then I think there's something after. I'm not too in tune with it, but like there is like a cultural thing, traditional thing that you kind of have to go through, and it's a process thing. And like I fear that for like my mom too, like when like if I lose my grandma, if she loses her mom, because I know my mom's gonna go through that because she's programmed in that way. And seeing her like that, it's like, right, like it would be easier for me to like wake up in the morning and see my mom like kind of like okay, going to work, doing her thing, and obviously being sad about her, her mom passing away, but knowing that she's gonna be like down bad, it's like Jesus fucking Christ, like here we go, like buckle up. Right. Absolutely. So I don't know if you like thought, like I think about these things, right, like because I'm very afraid of it. I'm very scared.
Reasonably. Like I would not like that for my, if that was my experience, like I would not like but also there's so I have a lot of thoughts because I've never heard about this before.
It's okay. Sorry, I didn't want to put this on
No,
you, but
this
I
is
just
so
thought of it. Yeah.
fascinating. One of my girlfriends is also a part of the culture, so it's really good for me to know, like, for her, you know, and these
Right.
come for her and how I can be a better friend. But this is fascinating because obviously we would hate to see our parents, our siblings devastated, and it was one of the hardest things I read in the book. Like, hardest things for me to see is like my mom upset, you know, like especially after dad like dying, and especially with how it happened. Like that was like the hardest part for me. And she really did have her stuff together so often. I don't know how, but seeing her when she was at those low points is still to this day like some of the saddest moments of my life. And so knowing that in your culture you're going to have to see that, you know, and I think inevitably you might have had to see it like, you know, anyway, like you'll probably see it in some way when your grandma dies, that your mom does like have these incredibly low points. There's, to me, I hear and I'm like, okay, it's awful because you have to do it and you have to do it by this set time frame, and everyone's doing it at the same time, which would also be really like taxing emotionally to see everybody like that and to be surrounded by that. But there's also something kind of nice about it because you know maybe when it's going to happen. If it is like a month exactly after this, it's like you're supposed to have a day of mourning or something, you can kind of prepare yourself a little bit maybe for it.
Right. Yeah.
But also, yeah, it's so fascinating. Like that was obviously not my experience, and I really wonder what I would have been like if that was my experience and how I would have reacted.
Was it more like uplifting after? Not uplift. I mean, nothing's uplifting after. Like, was it more of like an uplifting energy around, you know, your mom and dad passing away, like kind of trying to keep your spirits up with the people around you, or was it like just?
It was pretty devastating. It was up and down. For me, grief has been a roller coaster, and healing has been a roller coaster, and my response to loss has been so up and down. Right after, absolutely devastated. Like I black out, trauma. Like I don't have memories much of like both experiences, like what happened and how I was responding afterwards. But there were also lots of moments where I would have like and even to this day, like I'll talk to some of my mom's friends and hear a really new, like cool story about her, something that I didn't know. And it's just like really uplifting, you know, and those are really happy moments, even though it is like sad, but it is very happy to hear like, you know, something really funny about her that she did when her youth or whatever. But right after, I did seek a lot of like uplifting moments. Like I did go out, I did go, you know, and see my friends and try and have like distractions. You know, I had some friends that were great distractions, like I was saying, and being able to just see them and not have to think about what was going on in my life was great. Right. And so, yes, I saw uplifting moments. Yeah, they probably were not outweighed right after by like the amount of like I was screaming at the top of my lungs in my car moments.
Right.
So yeah, it's a give and take. But yeah, in your culture, then would there be like it would be mainly like very sad?
It's
for an
very
extended
sad.
amount
Like
of
it's
time.
like it's like one of those things where you invite people over to your house to cry together.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's very, very, it's one of the most depressing environments you can be in.
I bet.
And I feel like it's, like you said, like it's something that's worked, and maybe, I don't know much about it. I got to ask my mom about it, but like I think it's like, you know, therapeutic in a way to just really cry it out and just like be as sad as you can be for a while. And then from that, maybe like it's the philosophy is, you know, it's only up from now.
Yeah.
Maybe, I don't know. What's interesting too is like in Farsi, in the Persian culture, like we have this saying like, what do we say? We say like khoda nakone. That means like if I say like, you know, my grandma's gonna die one day, like I say, like if I just say that my grandma's gonna die one day, someone like my mom would say khoda nakone, like let's hope God doesn't do that.
Oh, okay.
Like so it's like a weird like thing that like since we've been kids, we've always been hearing that in the Persian culture, where it's like like it's kind of like you're tricking your brain into thinking it's not going to happen by you always saying that. When it is gonna happen, but you're kind of setting up the kid for disaster later on when it does happen.
True.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of people know that. Like we say that a lot. Like we say a lot of phrases where it's like, oh, like I hope your time doesn't, I hope your time doesn't run out. But it is. It's gonna fucking run out.
Inevitable.
Right?
Wow. Yeah, and how would you even have a conversation with a young kid at that time? Like if that was also, and they lost a parent, and that was kind of the mindset that they had.
Yeah, or even on birthdays, like for example, like, oh, I hope you live till 200. Like people used to say that to me, like, oh, till 150.
Yeah.
You're gonna live until 150. It's like, no, I'm not. Most likely not. Right? So, I mean, that's very, because I just thought of that, like, wow, like that's like, we're setting, I was set up for disaster.
You were.
Like, that's why I'm so fucking afraid of it. I just figured it out. I just figured it out. I just had an epiphany. What?
Literally. Whoa.
And do you think, like, that's probably not the healthiest way to go by things, I guess? Like,
I feel like there's no healthy way is the hard thing. Like there's healthy things you can try to do, right? Like to prepare and whatnot. But like, yeah, it's one of those things. How do you talk to kids about death? You know, how do you actually do that? Like, yeah, you don't want to give your kid like all these worries and anxiety about this, but you also do kind of want to prepare them maybe more than you've been prepared for it. So
were you prepared for it? Like, did your parents talk about it at all? Like, what did you know about it?
Okay, so my grandpa died like when I was like 2 years old, and that was my first like immediate kind of family loss. So I always knew, like, because of that and because we were fairly close with them, I knew that death was a thing, because it was like, oh, where'd grandpa go? And my mom was like really good communicator, nurse, so everything, right? So she kind of didn't, beat around the bush much and explained kind of what death was to me at that time. We also had like my dad was the youngest of his family, so I had like grandparents that were kind of sickly and older when I was like still fairly like in junior high and whatnot. And I had like some other family members. So I was introduced to the idea of death, before my dad had passed away. But I not in the same extent, and I didn't know it was as real, as it could be.
Right.
I definitely never thought my parents were going to pass away, or my sister, or like even then, like at the time, I was really not thinking, even my immediate grandparents or uncles or aunts. So I was probably prepared more than some people.
Right.
But
at least you weren't lied to and been like,
yeah.
Oh, like, let's hope God doesn't. Or you're going to live till 200, or I hope your time never runs out. Like, you weren't being fed these, like...
No, I wasn't. So maybe that did make it easier for me, and that will be something that makes your grief a lot harder.
Freaking thunderstorm coming at me.
Yeah.
Because of that, yeah.
Well, that's fascinating.
I mean, this was really good. I'm going to keep reading the book because I haven't finished it. I'm like 80% done, and I'm not gonna lie, man, like at some points you did a very good job of making it very like descriptive and like visceral, because as like the part where you talked about where you went into the car and you picked your phone up and started calling your mom, and like I actually like put my, like I was like imagining it, like putting pictures in my head of me doing that, and I kind of was like, holy shit, like I don't know how to do that. Or the part where you walked in to your mom and, she was in bed crying, like just picturing my mom, you know what I mean? Yeah. Like I kept putting myself in your shoes and I just couldn't, it was like pretty hard to, just read it. And, which is like, I mean, you did a good job of talking about it. It's very good. And
hold the book up.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
It's not like opposite, right? This grief thing fucking sucks.
Yeah.
I'm gonna read it. You better read it. You gonna read it, man?
You can't. It's okay. It's not like a super fun read. Like I definitely don't mind if people are like, I'm never gonna read this. I don't know if I would, frankly, but like for me, I've always really enjoyed learning from other people's experiences. Like nonfiction has always been something I really appreciated, and especially in not so much of an educational way. Like I don't, as much as the definitions and now knowing like what anticipatory grief is, disenfranchised grief is, it's helpful now. When I'm going through it or when I'm trying to prepare for it, that wasn't what I wanted to hear. I wanted somebody to say like, this shit is awful. And I wanted like to know that I wasn't alone with these situations. And I know that a lot of people experience like the phone call one. You'll probably, I'm hoping for a long, long time that's not the case, but one day you might experience that, because it is like such a common thing for people is in our day and age with technology, like to pick up their phone to text, you know, it would be just like a random day, like we win a volleyball game, you know, and I'm just like, oh my God, like we won. And I'm like, oh my God, like what am I doing right now? And a lot of people experience that because you just still are operating under that mindset of like, you know, they are with you and you haven't really, it's not so normal that they're not with you, you know, because it was just such a normal part of your life every day.
Right.
So yeah, it is weird manifestations coming your way, like hopefully in a very, very long time, but it's interesting. And I think that's one of the things I just wanted to share with people was like, these things are likely might happen to you, you know, they are normal though, and they happen to other people, because that's brought me a lot of comfort.
Absolutely. And I thank you for doing this, because I just, you sitting here and talking about it, I still don't get how you're doing it. I really don't. After all this, like you know what I mean? Like I just can't, and I'm not trying to be, you know, ignorant. I'm really, really trying to understand it. And, I appreciate you doing this and talking about it. And, you know, it's helped a lot of people I know it has. And, thank you, man.
No.
This is cool.
Well, thank you for creating space to talk about this.
Absolutely.
Like, because grief is, as we said, not really talked about. So this is really, I'm really grateful to be able to share this space.
Absolutely. I was worried if, like, I was thinking about, like, this is going to be the one where we need tissues. I thought it was going to be the one, but
I'm fairly, like, uppity. Like,
yeah.
So, yeah, I'm not a big, like, crier just in general. Like, it really takes me, like, I got to get low, like, there to cry. So for the most part, it's been, you know, more, like, how can you prepare? Like, these are my experiences, and I can talk about it and still, I mean, that's healing. I can talk about it and not cry. 3 years ago, that probably wasn't the case.
So, yeah. Well, this was fun. This was, well, not, I guess it was fun. I
think so.
Yeah,
it's important.
I'll say that. It was fun. Yeah, why not? Enjoy your 24, episode 52.
Nice.
With Taya Mikado.
Thank you.
The author of This Grief Thing Fucking Sucks. Go get it anywhere. Amazon. Let me do it straight. Can you see? Oh,
the matte finish kind of is.
There you go. Order online, Amazon, Kindle, wherever you want. And let's talk about grief more, man. I don't think it's talked about enough. I don't think it's, you know, it's really like dissected. What it is,
especially among our like generation, you know, like a lot of us haven't experienced it yet. We're not prepared for it, and those of us that might have experienced it are not comfortable talking about it. So, but thank you for creating hopefully some.
Hopefully this is the first step. So I appreciate you. Thank you, and peace. Nice.